My name is Joni Green, and I am the Deputy Chief Investigator here at the Department of Consumer Affairs. I was supposed to be joined today by our Chief Investigator, Ken Middlebrooks, but he's not able to make it. So I will do my best to get through all of the slides myself and hopefully not confuse anyone. Okay, so today we are going to be discussing pre-need funeral contracts. Some of the topics that we're going to cover are the difference between pre-need contracts and pre-arrangements, the licensing requirements for funeral homes that want to sell pre-need funeral contracts, the different types of contracts, some common mistakes we see funeral homes make, and what licensed funeral homes should expect during compliance reviews. Before we dive in, there were some legislative changes of note that I wanted to point out. In 2006, the regulation of pre-need funeral contracts was moved to the Department of Consumer Affairs from the Banking Commission over at the Board of Financial Institutions. And in 2012, the statute was changed to include the renewal process, and it also added stiffer penalties for mishandling pre-need funds. There have not been any legislative changes since 2012, and I'm not aware of any topics that are really on point to have anything in the future. So the first thing I want to talk about is the difference between a pre-arrangement and a pre-need funeral contract. This is a question that we get pretty often, and sometimes a lot of like the newish funeral directors are not really sure about the difference between the two. So a pre-arrangement is when a consumer comes into the funeral home and plans their service. They can pick out the whole service, they can just pick out part of the service, but they come in and they make their wishes known. They may or may not give copies of their like personal life insurance paperwork to the funeral director, but they don't actually pay any money. They just come in and they select items or goods and services that they want for their funeral, but they don't pay you anything. A pre-need funeral contract is when a consumer comes in and selects goods or services and they actually pay the funeral home money. The funeral home has to be licensed, and they have to use a state pre-need contract for a pre-need funeral contract. They have to use the state approved contract. And then they have to file that with the department, and they have to place those funds in either a trust account or an insurance policy. So basically, the key difference is that pre-arrangements, the consumer does not give the funeral home any money. For pre-need, the consumer does give the funeral home money. So to be able to sell a pre-need contract, the funeral home must first be licensed. There is a license with the department that is issued, and it must be renewed on every odd number year by September 30th. You can either file and renew by paper application from our website, or we have an online licensing portal. You can see the address there at the bottom of the screen. You can go in there and create an account and do everything electronically. The department will license the funeral home, not individual funeral directors. So if you're working at a funeral home that's licensed to sell pre-need contracts and you are a licensed funeral director in the state, then you can sell those pre-need contracts. If you want to sell insurance policies, the pre-need insurance policies, then you do have to get your own insurance license through the Department of Insurance, which is a separate license from Consumer Affairs. But any funeral director that works at the funeral home this license can sell the pre-need contracts and place that money in a trust account. Once you do get licensed, the funeral home needs to post their pre-need license someplace conspicuous so that the public can see that they are licensed. The department does not mail the paper files anymore, so you do have to go online and download it. There are directions on our website, but if you have trouble with that, you can always call somebody at the department and we can either help walk you through it, or a lot of times I just send it to people because it can be kind of complicated. To be approved for a license to sell pre-need contracts, the funeral home must obtain financial responsibility in the form of a surety bond or a letter of credit. The amount of the financial responsibility is based on the total balance of pre-need insurance and trust accounts. So, for example, if you have $150,000 worth of pre-need insurance sold and in the bank combined, you would need to have a bond or a letter of credit for $30,000. So the more you've sold, the more money you have in the bank or in insurance policies, the higher the letter of credit needs to be, or bond. So we're going to talk about the different types of pre-need funeral contracts. There are two different types that a funeral home can use when selling pre-need contracts. There is a guaranteed price contract and a non-guaranteed price contract. For a guaranteed price pre-need contract, the funeral home agrees to provide goods and services selected at the time of need for no additional cost. Basically, the consumer is going to lock in the price in effect at the time of buying the pre-need. So they come in today, they pick out their services, they pay you today's price, they live for 5 years. When they pass, they don't owe you any more money. They are still going to pay the 2024 prices. A non-guaranteed price pre-need contract is when a consumer comes in and picks out goods and services, but they agree to pay the prices in effect at the time of need. So basically, they come in and they pick out stuff they like, but you and the consumer agree that they will start putting money back for those goods and services, but they're going to pay the prices at the time that they pass for those goods and services. They're not going to lock in today's price. You might ask yourself, why would anyone choose to use a non-guaranteed versus a guaranteed? But there are advantages and disadvantages for both types of contracts. On the screen here, I tried to differentiate between the two contracts and the advantages and disadvantages for both the consumer and the funeral home. So for a guaranteed price pre-need contract, the consumer does lock in the price. The funeral home can't raise it on them. So no matter what inflation does, no matter how much the funeral home may raise their prices for services that they provide, the consumer will not owe any more money for those goods and services when they pass. It's locked in and they're good for that. For the funeral home, an advantage for someone to use a guaranteed price contract is that all of the money in the insurance policy or in the trust account must be paid to the provider at time of need. So, for example, if someone picks out a vault that costs, say, $1,000, the funeral home puts that money into a trust account, it grows to $1,050. When the consumer passes, the price of the vault is still $1,000. The funeral home gets to keep that $50 that has grown in the account. It does not have to be refunded. They get to keep that extra $50. They took the risk of guaranteeing the price, and they lucked out that the trust account grew more than the vault raised its price, so they came out ahead in that situation. So that kind of is the disadvantage of the guaranteed price contract for the consumer, is that if there is more money in those accounts, the funeral home keeps that money. They don't get any kind of a refund for the growth if inflation has not risen above the amount in the trust accounts. So that is kind of, so the advantage for the guaranteed price of the funeral home is the disadvantage for the consumer. The disadvantage for the funeral home for the guaranteed price contract is that the interest and the accretions to the accounts may not cover inflation. So, it could be that they paid, the consumer paid $1,000 for a vault at the time that they purchased the contract. The account raised $50, it grew by $50, but then when the person passes, that same vault might be $1,200. And in that situation, the funeral home loses because the rate of inflation outpaced the amount of interest in the account. For non-guaranteed pre-need contracts, the advantage for the consumer is that they don't have to pay the entire amount at one time. If they select goods and services and they start making payments for those goods and services, um, there's no negative effect if they don't have the whole amount paid at the time of need. The funds paid are applied to the funeral bill, and if there is any money that's still owed, the family can pay that balance. So basically, the consumer is just kind of squirreling away money that the family can use at their time of need to purchase their final arrangements. The advantage for the funeral home for the non-guaranteed price contract is that they can charge the prices in effect at the time of need. So if a vault was $1,000 when the consumer came in and selected it, and now it costs $1,200, the funeral home gets to charge the $1,200. They don't have to eat that $200 that maybe the account didn't grow. They would charge $1,200. The disadvantage for the funeral home, though, is that if there is more money in the account, in the trust account, or in the insurance policy, they don't get to keep it. So, if the vault is still $1,000, they paid $1,000, but the account now has $1,200 in it, they have to refund that extra $200. They don't get to keep that. So basically, a lot of the times, the advantage for the consumer is the disadvantage for the funeral home, and vice versa. There is a lot of benefits and disadvantages for both of these types of contracts, and that is one thing that the funeral director needs to kind of make clear when they're discussing these with consumers. It might make sense for one consumer to use a guaranteed price, where it might make more sense for somebody else to use a non-guaranteed price. So on either a guaranteed price or a non-guaranteed price contract, the consumer can elect to make it either revocable or irrevocable. Again, there are pros and cons both ways. For a revocable contract, the advantage is that a consumer can choose to revoke the contract at any time and get their money back. So if they have life changes or they have a change of heart and they want to cancel that pre-need contract, they can do it and they can get their money back. A disadvantage to making it revocable, though, is that the funds are still counted as assets for Medicaid qualification. A lot of people will use a pre-need funeral contract to spend down their account so they become eligible for Medicaid. And if the contract is revocable, those funds are still assets of the consumer, and it will not help them become eligible for Medicaid. An advantage of making a pre-need contract irrevocable is that the funds are now outside of the assets for the consumer, and that might help qualify them for those benefits. The money is spent, they can't get it back, so that will help them spend down to become eligible for Medicaid. The disadvantage to making it irrevocable is that the consumer only has 30 days to change his mind. After the 30-day look-back period is over, an irrevocable pre-need contract cannot be canceled, and the funds cannot be refunded. The money is now spent, and the only way to get it back is with a death certificate. There are certain items that are specifically prohibited by the statute, and those are listed here. You cannot include money for cemetery lots, crypts, niches, mausoleums, grave markers, or monuments. I'm not really sure why. I think it has something to do with the cemetery statutes. You can include funds to open and close the grave, but you cannot include any money for any other like grave, niche, crypt, anything like that. Once you sell a pre-need funeral contract, you must deposit the funds into a trust account or use the money to purchase an insurance policy within 30 days. You must also submit a copy of the contract to the department with the $20 filing fee, and you have to do that within 60 days of the last day of the month in which it was written. So for example, if you wrote a pre-need contract today, you would have to have the money in the trust account or used to purchase the insurance policy by June the 12th. That would be 30 days from today. And you must have this contract submitted to the department by August 1st. If it's submitted on August 1st or after, there is a $10 late fee that the department will add to your filing fee. When you submit a Preneed contract to the department, you must complete a monthly reporting form that accompanies the contracts. These forms are available on our website. I just kind of screenshotted the first and second page here so you could see what they look like. You can just download them on our website, off of our website, and you can print them off as you need. I think they're also PDF fillable, so you can go in there and like pre-print the name of the funeral home. You can type them if you want to, or you can just print it and handwrite it. It doesn't matter, to us. We'll take it either way, but you do have to complete this for each set of contracts you submit to the department. The investigators find that it's a good practice to keep a copy of these completed forms each time you submit them to the department. It's not mandatory, but it is helpful during compliance reviews if we have a question about whether a contract has been submitted or not, to find what batch of contracts it was included in. It helps us kind of track it down at the department, and make sure that that was filed on time. On page 2 of the monthly reporting form, down at the bottom, there is a place for the funeral home to let the department know when a pre-need funeral contract has been executed. You can send that in to us under C at the bottom of page 2. We would just want to know the consumer's name and then also maybe the date of death or date of cancellation if they canceled a revocable contract. And then on part B, there is a place for you to let us know if a pre-need contract has been transferred to another funeral home and what funeral home is now gonna serve that family. When you complete a pre-need contract or the monthly reporting form, there's a place for the funeral home to write their pre-need license number on both of those forms. The pre-need license is different from your funeral home establishment number that you get from the funeral board, or if you have your own personal insurance license number, that also is different. The number is on your pre-need license that you get from the department, and it starts with the letters PFL now, and then there's 6 digits after that. Some funeral homes are still using their old like 3-digit pre-need number, but those were used prior to the renewal process requirement. And now if that's the number you use, somebody here has to just look up to see what your actual pre-need number is. So if you're not already using the PFL number, if you could start, that would be a great help to us. And if anybody has questions about that, you can just let me know. I can tell you where to find it. So I've mentioned a couple times that you can use a trust account or an insurance policy as the funding vehicle for a pre-need funeral contract. The department doesn't endorse or prefer either, but there are some requirements for both to keep in mind. For trust accounts, a funeral home must maintain a ledger for each account that shows the accretions, deposits, fiduciary fee deductions, etc. to the account. The funeral home can use any type of ledger that they prefer. It can be a paper system, you can use a ledger book, you can use an electronic ledger or like a spreadsheet on your computer. It's really up to you as how you want to handle that, but it must be something that investigator can follow to see the history of the account. The ledger should start with the initial deposits. It should show the payments made, the interest each quarter as it accrues, and if the funeral home takes the fiduciary fee, we'd want to see those deductions on there as well. A fiduciary fee is a fee that the funeral home may keep. They can keep 10% of the interest that accrues each year for trust accounts to offset the management of the accounts. So basically, the money that you have to pay somebody to keep the ledgers, the money that you pay somebody to file the bank statements, just the clerical part of maintaining those trust accounts, that's what the fiduciary fee is supposed to help offset. You don't have to take the fiduciary fee. Some funeral homes choose to let that interest just stay with the account, so that the balance is higher at the time of need. It's completely up to the funeral home if you take it or not, but if you do take it, you have to show it on your ledger. For insurance policies, just keep in mind that the funeral director must be a direct employee of the funeral home and a licensed insurance agent. Some funeral homes will have part-time employees that just come around to sell those insurance policies for pre-need contracts, and that's fine. But that part-time employee still has to be a direct employee of the funeral home. So they have to get a paycheck from the funeral home, not just the commission for selling the insurance policies. Sometimes the funeral director with their insurance license will work for 2 or 3 funeral homes kind of in an area, and that's fine, but he has to be, or she has to be, a direct employee for each of those funeral homes. Earlier, when we were discussing prearrangements, I mentioned that a person can bring in their own personal life insurance and give it to a funeral home. And they can use those personal policies to fund pre-need funeral contracts. The funeral home may or may not put it on a state contract. If they are not licensed to sell pre-need, then they would just keep that information on file, and then when the person passes, they would, then try to file for the insurance benefits. If the funeral home is licensed to sell pre-need contracts and they want to kind of make the arrangement a little more official and use the state contract to write up the wishes of the consumer and use that private policy to fund the contract, then they must submit that to the department just like they would for a trust account or if they sold a pre-need insurance policy themselves. So some funeral homes will go ahead and put it on the state contract and submit it to us, but you don't have to. The key there, though, is that if you are going to use the state contract, you have to be licensed. If someone is going to use a privately owned insurance policy, the funeral home cannot keep funds for more than the cost of the goods and services provided. So if there's like a $30,000 insurance policy that someone brings in and they plan a $10,000 funeral, the funeral home doesn't get to keep the whole $30,000. They only get to keep the $10,000, which equals the amount of the goods and services that they provided. Generally, I see funeral homes write pre-need contracts that use private insurance policies as non-guaranteed price because there's no way to determine how much growth there is from the time the contract is written to the time of need for the portion of the total insurance policy that's going to pay for those services. So if you write it as a guaranteed price contract for $10,000 and the person lives for 5 years, there's no way to tell how much that $10,000 has grown over the past 5 years. So you would still just get $10,000. If you write it as a non-guaranteed price contract, then you would be able to use the prices in effect at the time of the person's passing, and you would get that money. It's up to you. The department does not have, we don't care how you do it one way or the other, but generally that's what I see. A consumer can transfer their pre-need funeral contract at any time. And it can be transferred to any licensed pre-need provider. So regardless of if it is a guaranteed price or non-guaranteed price, just because you write the contract doesn't mean you automatically are going to perform the service. If it is a trust account and the consumer decides to transfer, the original funeral home may keep 10% of the face amount of the contract and 10% of the interest that has accrued that year before they transfer the funds. If it's an insurance funded contract, the original funeral home doesn't get to keep any of the money. I guess the theory there is that you made some money when you sold the policy and the commission, so you don't get to keep any of the face amount of the contract. You have to transfer the whole insurance policy to the new funeral home. At need, a contract can be transferred to any licensed funeral home. So if you write a pre-need funeral contract for someone, and then when that person passes, their next of kin wants to use somebody down the street that doesn't have a pre-need license, they can still do that because at that point it's an at need and not a pre-need. There are some things that you want to make sure you're not doing once you become licensed to sell pre-need. You can't go to hospitals, nursing homes, rest homes, etc., and walk down the hall and try to talk people into purchasing a pre-need with you. If somebody is in a nursing home or a rest home or a senior living facility and they call you and ask you to come see them, that's fine, but you can't go and just start soliciting people to sign up for pre-needs. You also cannot solicit a relative of someone who's about to pass away into purchasing a pre-need contract. If they reach out to you, that's fine, but you can't just be lurking around hospitals and hearing who's not doing well and then trying to talk to their family and friends. Again, if someone calls you there, that's fine, but you can't go to their residence either to try to solicit or sell a pre-need unless they call you. So you can do like webinars, or you can do meetings at your funeral home. You can go out and talk to senior groups in your area. Any place you're invited, you can go and explain how it works and tell about the benefits of it and the reasons that they may want to buy a pre-need from you. It's fine. I've seen funeral directors do like lunches for people where they'll come out and they get a free lunch and they hear about how great the funeral home is. That's all fine. You can have them come to you, or if they've called and asked you to come see them, that's fine. But you can't solicit unless they've asked you to come in. So there are some penalties if you do things wrong. If it's during a routine compliance review and we find that something's not quite right, the first time we're just going to send you a deficiency letter and tell you, hey, your ledgers weren't updated, or you need to send in these pre-need contracts that you forgot to send in. Whatever the issue is, you didn't have your license posted, whatever it is. But we're just going to send you a letter and say, hey, we noted this deficiency during the compliance review, so please correct it, and we're all good. We, mark it, move on. If we come in during subsequent reviews and you still have the same problem time after time after time, there are possible administrative fines that you might get from the department. It's not going to be anything that like puts you out of business, but it's going to sting a little bit. If we've been there 4 or 5 times in a row and you have a bunch of contracts you need to submit to us and you just don't send them in, and every time we come it's the same problem, the department might send you a fine letter. And it'll sting a little bit because you need to get your contracts in on time. But again, it's just going to be something administrative. You're going to pay it. You'll learn your lesson. We'll move on. If there is a criminal matter, there are harsher penalties. And you can see there, it's really based on the amount of money of the pre-need contract that you have the problem with. So if you don't deposit the money into a trust account or use it to buy the insurance policy, if you don't write it on a state contract and you don't submit that to the department, if you are being a little shady and you're not handling the pre-need funds correctly, then there are criminal penalties there. And you can see, it goes from just being a misdemeanor with a fine or like 30 days in jail, all the way up to a fine at the discretion of court and up to 10 years in prison. And also the department is required to report these criminal matters to the Board of Funeral Service. So they may take action as well, but we do have to let them know if we have a criminal matter with your pre-need license. The state does oversee a loss reimbursement fund. And what that is that there's a portion of the filing fees that you pay when you submit those contracts, and those are deposited into a loss reimbursement fund. And what that fund is set up for is to assist families that have lost funds because somebody didn't handle it correctly. Either the funeral home, either they didn't deposit it the way they were supposed to, and then the funeral director passes away and the survivors are not sure where the money is, or they just defraud people and they just take the money and skip town. The family can come back to the state and they can file for an application for the monies that they paid in to be reimbursed. You can only get money for the amount that's been paid. There wouldn't be like interest accrued to that money. But if you paid ABC Funeral Home $5,000 and ABC Funeral Home just in the middle of the night left town and nobody knows where they are, you can file an application with the state and we will reimburse the $5,000. The money is only paid at time of need, but you can go ahead and talk to, XYZ Funeral Home and let them know that you have a pre-need application on file with the department and that there's $5,000 that will come from the loss reimbursement fund. We work with funeral homes from time to time in these situations, so most of the time they know what you're talking about there. But it does help, and it has come in handy for some misfortunate situations where consumers would have been out thousands of dollars, but the state was able to help make that right. So during a compliance review, once a funeral home is licensed to sell pre-need funeral contracts, the department will visit the location every other year to conduct a compliance review. We will ask to look at your current bank statements, your insurance reports, your ledgers, receipt books. We may look at pre-need funeral contract files and also copies of those monthly reporting forms. What we're doing is we're checking to make sure that we have all the contracts. They've all been submitted to us. We're making sure that we have like the names, the account numbers, the amounts of the contracts correct in our database. And we're making sure that the money was handled correctly. So the person came in on February the 1st and signed a contract. We want to make sure that that money was put where it was supposed to and that you didn't hold it until July to go open the trust account. So those are things that we're looking for. And again, if we see something that's not right, we are just going to work with you to get you in compliance. I like to tell my funeral directors when I'm out in the field that we don't try to be like harsh with our penalties and stuff. We want to work with you. So if you ever have questions about anything, we're not punitive that we're going to come out and find a mistake here or there, even if it's something that has to be fixed. We have to get a consumer back in to sign a new contract, or we didn't get the money put in exactly in the right amount of time and stuff. We're going to work with you to get you in compliance so you don't have that problem again going forward. So don't be afraid to reach out if you have a situation that you're not sure about, if something weird has come up, if you just don't know how to handle something. We would rather you call us and us figure out together a way to handle it than you do something that might even get you in more hot water down the road. I've got some tips here for compliance reviews. You can keep your files like in a consistent stacking order. That helps the investigators find the disclosures or the contracts. If everything's in there kind of in a consistent way, you're not having to dig through just papers and papers and papers. That's helpful. If you can keep all the files in a central location, so you have a certain drawer or a certain file cabinet that all the pre-needs in, that's better than us having a question, you having to dig through boxes on your desk and 3 different file cabinets. Keep all those pre-need records together and keep them in some sort of searchable order, whether that's by alphabetical by name, if you keep them by like a contract number, whatever system you have. If you can keep those together and in order, it helps us when we have questions. Don't shoot the messenger. So if we come in and we see something that's not right, don't get mad at the person that's pointing out the problems. We're just trying to help you resolve those issues so that you don't have more problems in the future. We're just trying to help you do things the right way. So, don't take offense if we come in and start pointing out things. We're just trying to make you the best you can be. Make notes in the file for any problems or issues with, a certain pre-need contract situation. If, like, for a minute ago, I was saying that, we're going to look and see if the contract was written on February 1st, but you didn't open the trust account until July 1st. We're gonna ask you about that. Now, it could be that they did sign the contract on February 1st, but they had a hard time getting the money together to pay you. They didn't get it transferred from an account to something else, or something happened in their life and they didn't bring the check back to you. There could be a reason that money was not deposited until July 1st. And if you can make notes and keep copies of, checks, receipts, that sort of thing to explain it, sometimes things happen. But you're gonna think you're gonna remember everything when you're, first starting out and you're first writing pre-need contracts. You're gonna be like, well, I'll remember that they didn't pay me until 2 months later. I'll remember that when they ask me about it. But as you sell more and more pre-need contracts, you're going to forget stuff. It's going to, kind of jumble together. You're not going to remember. So just make some notes in the file. So when we ask you about those, you'll be able to tell us. And also make sure you have your current license posted. A lot of times we'll go in and we'll see a license that's been expired. So keep the active one up. So what about unlicensed folks? When we're out and about in the world, we do make contact with funeral homes that are not licensed to sell pre-need contracts. We stop in and we introduce ourselves. We ask them if they're interested, and if they are, we can point them in the right direction for the application or the online licensing portal. And then we also have them sign an affidavit that they know they have to be licensed to sell pre-need, so that if something comes up down the road, they can't say, well, I didn't know. Well, if we've stopped and talked to you and you sign something saying you do know, you can't claim that as your defense in the future if you sell some pre-need and you're not supposed to. We also talk to licensed pre-need providers when we're in the funeral homes. When we're there doing the compliance reviews, we'll ask if they know of anybody in the area that might be selling pre-need that's not licensed. We don't rat you out when we go talk to the unlicensed folks, but sometimes the funeral homes that are licensed know more than we do here in Columbia. You're living in the area, you know what's going on. So sometimes we use that as a tool also. Consumer complaints against unlicensed providers are the best. If someone has bought a pre-need from somebody that wasn't licensed and they can provide us with paperwork, canceled checks, that sort of thing, that gives us a lot of grounds to go in and talk to those unlicensed folks and find out what's going on there. So if you ever have a consumer come in and say they paid ABC Funeral Home for grandma's funeral and they're not licensed, if that family could contact us, that would be a great way for us to check out ABC Funeral Home. So here I've got some just kind of random things that I wanted to make sure that I touched on that didn't really fit in any of my other slides. A few of them might be repeats, but it's just stuff I thought was important. So first, again, you have to be a licensed funeral director to sell pre-need contracts. If you're an apprentice, you can sit in with a licensed funeral director, but you can't sell the contract yourself. It has to be the licensed funeral director. The license is location specific. So if you have a main location and a chapel, and you only have a pre-need license for the main location, you can't start selling pre-need for that chapel unless you get that chapel licensed. They're not transferable. It's not like it's not coverage for your whole business. It's just for the specific location listed on the license. On a pre-need contract, the beneficiary is the person for whom the services are being purchased, not the funeral home that's going to get the funds at death. So on normal insurance policies, the beneficiary is the person that's going to receive the money, and that's not how it is on a pre-need contract. The beneficiary is the person that you're buying the services for. And then the purchaser is going to be the person paying for the pre-need contract. Sometimes that's one and the same. I could go and buy a pre-need contract for myself. So in that situation, I am the beneficiary and also the purchaser. I'm using my money to pay for my own funeral. But sometimes it could be that the purchaser is different. So a family member may come in and buy a funeral for grandma, or a husband might buy it for a wife, a child might buy it for a parent, whatever those situations are. But just wanted to point that out because some funeral homes do get kind of confused on that. On pre-need contracts, you can write see attached statement of goods and services on the contract and just attach that statement to the contract. There are some lines in the middle of the contract for you to write the goods and services that the pre-need is to purchase. But it's a small area, and sometimes funeral homes have a hard time getting everything listed in there. So they'll just attach that statement of goods and services to the contract, and that way everything's kind of itemized on that statement. Another thing that I wanted to make sure I pointed out is that you can only accept payments up to the amount on the pre-need contract. So if your pre-need contract has a contract amount of $5,000, you can only accept payments up to $5,000. If the consumer makes all those payments and they still have money that they need to spend to stay eligible for Medicaid or whatever, you would need to write another pre-need contract to cover those additional payments. Don't leave the contract price on the contract blank. You need to have a number in there. Sometimes we will get contracts that are non-guaranteed price, and it's just, it's just a blank number in there. They don't put an amount. So you need to put some number in that blank. It doesn't need to be just a open space. Consumers can have more than one pre-need contract. Sometimes we'll see that a consumer will come in and they'll purchase a pre-need contract just for the professional services from the funeral home, and they'll pay that one off. And then they'll come back and pay for a casket, and they pay that one off. And then they may come back and pay money for a vault, and they make payments on that until it's paid off. So they may have 2 or 3 pre-need contracts, just depending on their financial situation. And that's fine. You can have more than one, or you can just have one pre-need contract with all those items listed and make payments up to whatever that contract amount is. It's really, some consumers like to just have things paid off and done and kind of finalized, and that's fine. But you can just write one and have people just make payments up to whatever that grand total is. It is acceptable to write goods and services to be selected at time of need on a non-guaranteed price contract. So sometimes we'll see like social workers will come into a funeral home and they are custodians for a special needs adult or an elderly person that doesn't have family in the area, and they need to spend down money for Medicaid possibly, but they don't want to pick out the person's funeral. So they may come in and purchase a non-guaranteed price contract with a funeral home for X amount of money, $4,000. But they don't want to pick anything out. So you can just write on there for those goods and services to be selected at time of need. So when the person does pass, whoever their next of kin is can come in and use that money towards whatever funeral services they pick out. And that's fine. We see that from time to time. If the merchandise selected is not available at the time of need, then the provider has to make available merchandise of equal or greater value. And the purchaser or his representative is entitled to approve any substitutions. So if the casket that Mama picked out is not available anymore, then her next of kin would get to pick out something equal or nicer. You can't give lower end things to replace stuff that's not available. And then all of the forms that I've talked about today are available on our website, and that is our website address at the bottom. And this is what our website looks like. So when you hit go there, it'll come up to kind of our homepage. And then if you will select business resources and laws, and then go to licensing, you'll see all the stuff that we license. And when you select pre-need funeral contracts, it comes up like this. So you can see we've got the statute there. It's got all the forms and instructions under licensing, and then just some other odds and ends things on there. There's also a link to the online licensing system at that page. So if you are looking to get licensed or not, that would be the place to go. And if y'all have any questions or concerns, please feel free to reach out. And if nothing else, y'all have a great day.